The binoculars trembled slightly in Obergefreiter Klaus Weimer's hands as he watched the horizon beyond Omaha Beach darken with ships. Dawn, June 6, 1944, and the sight defied comprehension, an armada stretching beyond the curve of the earth. Each vessel, a steel dot against the gray Atlantic sky. The fate of the Wehrmacht's panzer forces would be decided not by the superiority of German engineering, but by a simple, devastating arithmetic that no one in the Third Reich had bothered to calculate. Weimer lowered his field glasses and turned to his Panther crew, their faces still slack with sleep in the concrete bunker they'd called home for 3 months. Through the gun port, the metallic tang of sea salt mixed with the diesel fumes from their idling tank, while beneath their boots, the Atlantic wall's reinforced concrete transmitted the distant rumble of naval bombardment like a seismic heartbeat. Americans, Weimer spat, his voice carrying the casual contempt that had infected German armor crews since their first encounters with Allied tanks in North Africa. More of their tin cans, no doubt. His loader, Heinrich Brunner, had seen the captured American tanks at the depot near Caen. Just 2 weeks prior, M4 Shermans, with their pathetically thin armor, and what German intelligence dismissively cataloged as adequate 75mm guns. The Panther's long-barreled KWK-42 could punch through Sherman armor at ranges where the American gun couldn't even scratch German steel. Every panzer crew from Normandy to the Ruhr knew the numbers by heart. 80mm of sloped frontal armor on the Panther versus the Sherman's pitiful 25 to 75mm. The mathematics of superiority seemed clear. What they couldn't know, crouched in their fortified positions along the Norman coast, was that America had already won the war through an equation their commanders had refused to consider. While Germany had produced fewer than 6,000 Panthers during the entire war, American factories had delivered their 49,000th Sherman tank just 3 months earlier. Ford's Willow Run plant alone assembled more armored vehicles in a single month than Germany's entire tank production for most of 1943. But numbers were abstractions. What German crews understood was steel against steel, gun against gun, the physics of penetration, and the geometry of deflection. Obergefreiter Franz Kleber of the 21st Panzer Division had written to his wife just days earlier, his letter discovered decades later in Wehrmacht archives. The Americans build quantity, but we build quality. Their Shermans burn so easily, our men call them Ronsons. They light every time. When this invasion comes, it will be a slaughter. The bocage country behind the beaches told a different story. Norman hedgerows, those ancient earthen banks, crowned with thick vegetation, had turned the countryside into a maze of natural tank traps, where range meant nothing and numbers meant everything. In the sunken lanes between fields, a Sherman's shorter gun could kill a Panther with a side shot at 50 meters just as easily as a Panther could destroy a Sherman at 800 meters in open country. Yet German confidence remained unshaken. The Panzer Lehr Division's war diary, meticulously maintained until the unit's destruction, recorded the prevailing mood. Enemy armor encountered thus far has proven inferior in protection and firepower. Our defensive positions are strong, and the terrain favors defensive operations. Every shell that screamed overhead that morning, as the pre-dawn bombardment intensified, Weimer's crew felt the Atlantic wall shudder around them. Through the narrow vision ports, they watched landing craft approach the surf line, each one carrying what German intelligence estimated to be a single platoon of infantry. Standard doctrine, predictable tactics, the kind of assault German defenders had repelled at Anzio and held at the Gustav Line. What they couldn't see were the specialized armor units preparing to swim ashore, DD Sherman tanks fitted with canvas flotation screens and twin screws, engineering vehicles carrying bridge-laying equipment, flame-throwing crocodiles, and mine flail tanks equipped to clear paths through obstacles. The Allies weren't just launching an infantry assault, supported by a few scattered tanks. They were deploying an integrated mechanized force designed to transform beach obstacles into supply corridors within hours of landing. But here's what would shatter German assumptions completely: the sight of Allied logistics in action, the relentless flow of men and material that would soon turn temporary footholds into permanent invasion ports. Within 72 hours, more Sherman tanks would be fighting in Normandy than Germany had operational Panthers on the entire Western Front. Were German tank crews right to feel confident as they watched that first wave approach? Or had they already lost a war they didn't realize was being fought not in the bocage, but in the factories of Detroit? Before we dive deeper into that fateful morning, tell us in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is where you are. And if you're fascinated by the untold stories of armored warfare, make sure to like this video and subscribe for more deep dives into military history that changed the world. The real shock was still hours away. At 0630 hours, the first DD Sherman broke the surf line at Omaha Beach, its canvas flotation screen collapsing as tracks bit into Norman sand. Obergefreiter Weimar watched through his periscope as what looked like a single tank emerged from the waves. Then another, in an endless mechanical procession that defied every intelligence report he'd ever read. This was the moment German armor doctrine collided with American industrial reality, and the collision would rewrite the rules of armored warfare forever. The sound hit first, not the familiar growl of a few scattered tanks, but a mechanical symphony that seemed to rise from the earth itself. Through the reinforced concrete of his position, Weimar felt the vibrations of dozens, then hundreds of tracked vehicles grinding inland. The acrid smell of diesel exhaust, mixed with cordite and salt spray, created a nauseating fog that clung to everything, while beneath his hands, the Panther's controls grew slick with nervous sweat and hydraulic fluid that seemed to leak from every fitting. His gunner, Unterscharführer Otto Kleist, had trained for this scenario countless times. Engage at maximum range. Use superior optics to identify targets. Let the KWK-42's high-velocity 75mm gun do what German engineering had designed it to do. Standard German doctrine called for drawing enemy armor into killing fields where Panthers and Tigers could engage at ranges exceeding 1,000 meters. But the bocage had other plans. Sergeant First Class Jimmy Morrison of the 2nd Armored Division later described what German crews couldn't see from their fixed positions. We hit that beach and just kept coming. Every time we knocked down a hedgerow, there were 5 more Shermans behind us. Every time they knocked out one of ours, 2 more would flank around. It wasn't tactics, it was arithmetic. The mathematics were staggering. By noon on June 6th, Allied forces had landed over 150,000 men and began the process of bringing nearly 20,000 vehicles ashore. Among these were specialized engineering tanks that German intelligence had never catalogued. AVREs carrying massive petard mortars to destroy fortifications, crocodile flamethrowers with ranges exceeding 100 meters, and mine flail tanks that could clear paths through obstacles at walking speed. Weimar's first engagement came at 1400 hours when his Panther's periscopes picked up movement in the hedgerow 800 meters to his front. A single Sherman, exactly as doctrine predicted. Range, optimal. Target, stationary. Conditions, perfect for German gunnery superiority. Load armor piercing, Kleist called to his loader. The familiar routine chamber the round, traverse the turret, align the crosshairs. At this range, the WK-42 could punch through the Sherman's frontal armor like paper. The shot was perfect. High-velocity tungsten core striking steel at precisely the angle German ballistics tables promised would guarantee penetration. The Sherman brewed up in a gout of orange flame and black smoke. Textbook German victory. Then 3 more Shermans emerged from the same hedgerow gap. Then 5 more from the adjacent field. Then an entire platoon from positions Weimar hadn't even known existed. Liberation through overwhelming numbers. What German crews discovered that afternoon was that American armor doctrine had evolved beyond their understanding. The Sherman wasn't designed to fight Panthers one-on-one. It was designed to fight them 15-on-1. While German engineers had perfected the art of building superior individual tanks, American planners had solved a different problem: how to put more armor on the battlefield than the enemy could possibly destroy. Corporal Robert Chen, of the 4th Armored Division, whose great-grandfather had built the Central Pacific Railroad, wrote to his family 3 days after the landing, "The Germans have better tanks, better guns, better armor. But we have more tanks than they have shells. Every time they shoot, they tell us where they are. Every time they move, we have 5 Shermans waiting. They're fighting the wrong war." The bocage itself became America's secret weapon. In the maze of sunken lanes and earthen banks, range advantages disappeared. A Sherman at 50 meters could put a 75-millimeter round through a Panther's side armor just as effectively as a Panther could destroy a Sherman at 800 meters. The difference was that America could afford to lose Shermans getting close enough for that flanking shot. By late afternoon, Weimer's Panther was immobilized not by enemy fire, but by the mechanical failure that plagued German armor throughout the campaign. A thrown track, probably from backing over the rough terrain while attempting to engage multiple targets. In American units, recovery vehicles would have towed the damaged tank to field workshops for repair within hours. German logistics, stretched thin by Allied interdiction bombing, meant that Weimer's crew would abandon their Panther and retreat on foot. The diary of Feldwebel Hans Müller, recovered from the ruins of Villers Bocage in 1991, captures the psychological impact. June 7, 1944. Counted 37 Sherman wrecks in our sector. Also counted 41 operational Shermans moving toward our positions. Their mathematics are different from ours. But here's what German crews couldn't have known. The Shermans they were fighting represented just the beginning. In depots across England, thousands more M4S waited for transport to France. In American factories, production lines that had delivered 49,000 Shermans were already retooling to produce improved versions with thicker armor and more powerful guns. As Weimer's crew stumbled through the Norman countryside that evening, the sound of diesel engines followed them like mechanical thunder. Not the careful, measured advance of superior German armor, but the relentless grinding of an industrial machine that could replace losses faster than German gunners could create them. The real revelation wasn't coming from the beaches, it was heading inland, where German defensive doctrine would meet American logistics in the killing fields of the hedgerow country. The metal tusks welded to Sergeant Tommy Sullivan's Sherman looked like something from a medieval siege engine. Crude steel prongs jutting forward from the tank's hull like the horns of an angry bull. June 15, 1944, and the improvised Rhino device was about to solve a problem German defensive doctrine had never anticipated. German crews had counted on the bocage to neutralize Allied numerical superiority, but American ingenuity was already 3 steps ahead of Wehrmacht tactical planning. The morning air in the hedgerow country carried the sweet stench of cordite mixed with the organic decay of torn earth and shattered vegetation. Through his tank's periscope, Sullivan could see the ancient Norman earthwork looming ahead 4 feet of packed soil, crowned with centuries-old hawthorn and bramble, thick enough to stop a direct artillery hit. Beneath his hands, the Sherman's controls vibrated with the deep growl of the 500-horsepower radial engine, while around him, the familiar cramped interior reeked of hydraulic fluid, gun oil, and the nervous sweat of 5 men packed into a space smaller than most closets. Traditional tank doctrine demanded that armor climb over such obstacles, exposing the vehicle's thin belly armor to German panzerfausts and mines. The Germans had spent months preparing for exactly this vulnerability, positioning anti-tank teams in carefully surveyed positions where climbing Shermans would present perfect targets. But Sergeant Curtis Cullen, Jr., of the 102nd Cavalry Reconnaissance Squadron, had solved the bocage problem with scrap metal from German beach obstacles and a welding torch. The Rhino device allowed Shermans to punch through hedgerows instead of climbing over them, maintaining armor protection while creating surprise attack corridors. Hauptfeldwebel Ernst Bachmann of Panzer Regiment II later described the psychological impact in a post-war interview. "We had positioned ourselves perfectly to engage climbing tanks. Then the Shermans simply drove through the hedgerow like it wasn't there. Our entire defensive calculation became worthless in 30 seconds. Sullivan's Sherman hit the hedgerow at 15 miles per hour, the rhino tusks tearing through centuries of growth like a mechanical scythe. Behind him, 4 more M4S followed in single file, emerging into the Norman pasture where Bachmann's Panther had waited in carefully planned ambush. At 50 meters range in close country, German armor superiority meant nothing. The engagement lasted 4 minutes. When the smoke cleared, Bachmann's Panther was a burning wreck, destroyed by flanking shots that its thick frontal armor couldn't prevent. The crew escaped, but their tank, irreplaceable to German logistics, became another casualty of Allied industrial mathematics. Numbers don't lie, even in war. By mid-June, American field workshops were producing Rhino devices faster than German intelligence could catalog them. Tank battalions that had been stalled by bocage terrain suddenly possessed the mobility to appear anywhere, anytime. German defensive positions planned around natural obstacles became death traps as Shermans materialized from directions Wehrmacht doctrine considered impossible. The diary of Lieutenant Robert Braun, captured at St. Vith and discovered in 1978, provides the German perspective. June 20th, the Americans have modified their tanks with metal teeth. They cut through hedgerows like scissors through paper. We can no longer predict where they will attack. Our defensive plans are obsolete. What German crews couldn't comprehend was the scale of Allied adaptation. Within 3 weeks of D-Day, American workshops had produced over 500 Rhino devices using German beach obstacles as raw material. The Atlantic Wall steel was being recycled into weapons that negated German defensive advantages. Poetic justice through American pragmatism. The bocage fighting revealed another devastating Allied advantage: combined arms coordination that German doctrine couldn't match. While Panthers and Tigers operated as individual hunting vehicles, American Shermans moved in integrated teams supported by artillery, aircraft, and engineering assets that could respond to battlefield developments in real time. Technical Sergeant Mike Rodriguez of the 3rd Armored Division described the systematic destruction of German strongpoints. "We'd call in artillery to suppress the position, then air support to mark targets, then engineers to clear obstacles while Shermans flanked around. By the time the Germans figured out where we were already somewhere else." German crews found themselves fighting not individual tank duels, but coordinated assaults by entire combined arms teams. A single Panther might face 4 Shermans, 2 tank destroyers, a battery of artillery, and close air support simultaneously. Superior German gunnery became irrelevant when targets multiplied faster than crews could engage them. The sound of liberation, tracked vehicles grinding through hedgerows 24 hours a day. But here's what shattered German morale completely: the sight of American logistics in action. German tank crews watched disabled Shermans being recovered, repaired, and returned to combat within hours. Meanwhile, German armor, immobilized by mechanical failure or battle damage, sat abandoned for lack of spare parts and recovery vehicles. Obergefreiter Klaus Weimer, whose crew had abandoned their Panther on June 6th, witnessed this disparity firsthand while retreating towards Saint-Lô. American recovery vehicles worked constantly. They pulled damaged Shermans from battlefields like farmers harvesting wheat. Our disabled Panthers became pillboxes because we had no way to move them. By late June, German armor units were reporting strength levels below 50%, not from battle losses alone, but from mechanical failures that couldn't be repaired. American tank battalions maintained combat effectiveness above 80% through aggressive maintenance and endless supplies of replacement vehicles. The mathematics of attrition were working exactly as American planners had intended. Every German tank knocked out was irreplaceable. Every Sherman destroyed was a temporary inconvenience. What would happen when this relentless pressure finally broke German defensive doctrine? The answer was already forming in the Allied staff tents, where Operation Cobra was being planned, a breakthrough that would unleash American armored might across the open country beyond the bocage. July 25, 1944, 0940 hours. The earth beneath Panzer Grenadier Wilhelm Koch's boots began to shake with a rhythm that seemed to come from the planet's core itself. Not the familiar percussion of artillery, but something far more terrifying. The synchronized thunder of 2,500 Allied bombers preparing to erase German defensive lines from the map. Operation Cobra was about to demonstrate that American industrial might could reshape battlefields as easily as it had reshaped continents. The pre-strike silence along the Perrier-Saint-Lô road carried an electric tension that made veteran German soldiers check their weapons reflexively. Through the morning haze, Koch could smell the distinctive odor of high-octane aviation fuel, mixed with summer dust and the sickly sweet stench of week-old corpses trapped in collapsed bunkers. Beneath his fingertips, his Panzerfaust felt inadequate, a single-shot weapon against what German radio intercepts suggested would be the largest concentrated armored assault in military history. What Koch couldn't know was that behind Allied lines, 1,700 Sherman tanks were already moving into jump-off positions, their crews methodically checking ammunition loads and fuel levels, while mechanics made final adjustments to tracks and engines. The bocage fighting had been practice. This would be the examination. The bombardment began with a sound that redefined the concept of overwhelming force. B-24 Liberators and B-17 Flying Fortresses dropped over 4,000 tons of high explosive on a rectangular killing zone, 4 miles wide and 1.5 miles deep. German defensive positions that had withstood weeks of ground assault simply vanished, replaced by smoking craters and twisted steel. Hauptmann Franz Weber of Panzer Lehr Division, interviewed by American intelligence officers in 1946, described the psychological impact. It was not bombing. It was the systematic destruction of reality. When it ended, nothing looked familiar. Roads, villages, even the shape of fields had changed. Then came the Shermans, not dozens, not hundreds, but endless mechanical rivers that flowed through the gaps, blown in German lines like steel-gray lava. The 1st Infantry Division's combat photographer, Sergeant Robert Kappa, captured images that would define the breakout. Columns of M4S stretching beyond the horizon, their dust clouds visible from aircraft flying at 10,000 feet. The mathematics of industrial warfare in action. What German crews witnessed that morning shattered every assumption about armored combat they had carried since 1939. American doctrine had never intended Sherman versus Panther duels. It had designed a system where German armor would face impossible choices, engage the lead Shermans, and reveal positions to follow on waves, or retreat and surrender prepared defensive terrain without fighting. Staff Sergeant Tony Viscardi of the 2nd Armored Division later described the sensation of participating in Cobra. It felt like being part of a mechanical avalanche. Every time we crested a hill, there were more Shermans behind us. Every time the Germans knocked one out, 5 more would appear. They weren't fighting tanks. They were fighting American industry. The German response revealed the fatal flaw in Wehrmacht doctrine. Panthers and Tigers, designed as individual hunters, couldn't mass quickly enough to meet concentrated American attacks. By the time German commanders identified breakthrough points and moved reserves, Allied armor had already exploded into open country where German defensive preparations meant nothing. Koch's anti-tank team managed to destroy 3 Shermans before American artillery, directed by forward observers in radio contact with supporting aircraft, obliterated their position. The crew escaped, but their experience typified German defensive collapse, local victories overwhelmed by strategic disaster. Within 72 hours, Operation Cobra had torn a gap 20 miles wide in German lines. American armor poured through like water through a broken dam, spreading across Norman countryside at speeds that German staff planning had deemed impossible for mechanized forces. The diary of Oberst Heinrich von Luttwitz, captured commanding the 2nd Panzer Division, provides the German command perspective. July 28th. American armor advancing faster than our retreat. They bypass resistance instead of reducing it. Their logistics follow their spearheads without pause. We cannot match this operational tempo. What von Luttwitz couldn't articulate was that American forces were demonstrating a new form of warfare, industrial combat, where production capacity became battlefield firepower. Every German tank knocked out represented irreplaceable strategic loss. Every Sherman destroyed was a tactical inconvenience quickly remedied by replacement vehicles already en route from depot ships. Liberation through overwhelming abundance. The pursuit phase revealed American armor doctrine's true genius. While German commanders attempted to establish new defensive lines, Sherman columns simply drove around strong points, leaving isolated garrisons to be reduced by follow-on infantry. Speed and numbers replaced siege warfare with mechanized encirclement. By August 1st, American armor had advanced over 60 miles in 6 days, an operational pace that German doctrine considered impossible to sustain. Yet Allied logistics kept pace effortlessly, delivering fuel, ammunition, and spare parts to spearhead units as quickly as they could consume supplies. The Falaise Pocket, created when American and British forces met near Chambois on August 19th, trapped the remnants of 2 German armies. Of the 50,000 German soldiers who escaped the encirclement, fewer than 20 operational tanks accompanied them. The Wehrmacht's armored strength in Normandy, built around the technical superiority of Panthers and Tigers, had been systematically destroyed by inferior American tanks operating in superior numbers. Obergefreiter Klaus Weimer, whose story began this narrative, surrendered near Falaise on August 20th. In his final diary entry, discovered decades later in Wehrmacht archives, he wrote, "The Americans were right, and we were wrong. Not about individual tanks, but about war itself. They understood what we did not, that 10 adequate weapons will always defeat 1 perfect weapon. We built better tanks, they built better doctrine." The German tank crews who had smirked at Sherman vulnerability in June were prisoners or casualties by September. Their technically superior Panthers and Tigers lay scattered across Norman fields, destroyed not by superior American gunnery, but by superior American arithmetic. The arsenal of democracy had proven that wars are won in factories, not drawing boards. 500 Shermans had rolled into Normandy on D-Day. By September, over 5,000 American tanks had participated in the campaign, with replacement vehicles arriving faster than German forces could destroy them. The mathematics of victory had been written not in armor thickness or gun calibers, but in production statistics that transformed American industrial capacity into irresistible military force. The German crews had been fighting the wrong war from the very beginning.